Thank you for inviting me as a guest speaker to this important symposium. I wish I could be with you all in Cetinjski, but I have commitments in Washington this week that I cannot neglect. Special thanks to Milan Markovic in the Faculty of Montenegrin Language and Literature for inviting me. My subject is the Balkans at another historical crossroads. One could argue that the peninsula has experienced so many crossroads in its long history that it's a miracle that anyone knows which way they are actually going. Using the crossroads analogy a step further, I will examine the traffic lights, particularly the flashing red lights of danger, the amber or yellow lights of standstill, and the flashing green lights that can ensure progress for the entire region. The most dangerous flashing red lights are the revival of the Greater Serbia project and the neo-imperial agenda of Vladimir Putin's Kremlin. The Greater Serbia project has been resuscitated under the presidency of Aleksandar Vučić, but unlike during the Slobodan Milošević era, the project no longer revolves around outright war, ethnic murders, mass expulsions, or territorial capture. The campaign now operates through three main principles: stealth, flexibility, and patience. Under Milošević, an enlarged Serbia was supposed to emerge from a crumbling Yugoslavia by seizing territories containing Serbian majorities from neighboring republics and murdering or expelling other ethnic groups to create Serbian majorities. The project failed largely because of the resistance of Croats, Bosniaks, Albanians, and Montenegrins, and eventual international military intervention led by the United States. Vučić served as Milošević's Minister of Information and is therefore very familiar with disinformation and deception to achieve grandiose political goals. With his Progressive Party monopolizing Serbian politics and the opposition sidelined, Vučić has plenty of space to pursue Serbia's mini-imperial Balkan ambitions. Belgrade's strategy includes several elements: by weakening neighbors, engaging in duplicitous diplomacy, and benefiting from Russia's assistance. The three main targets of the revived Greater Serbia project are Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Montenegro. Kosovo cannot be reabsorbed by Serbia, and opposition to any form of partition remains pronounced. Belgrade's objective is to identify and definitely delay a final settlement in bilateral relations, and to keep Kosovo unstable and uncertain about its future. A weak Kosovo enables Belgrade to increase its regional leverage. Bosnia-Herzegovina is a second major target of pan-Serbianism. The country remains dysfunctional primarily because of the blocking policies of the autonomous Republika Srpska. Its leader Milorad Dodik periodically threatens to secede and create a new Serbian state. The territory has a predominantly Serbian population following the wartime genocide of the Bosniak Muslims. Although Vučić avoids campaigning for Bosnian partition and absorption of the RS, the calculation is that a wider regional crisis and conflicts within Bosnia itself will provide future opportunities for secession when the West is distracted. Although Montenegro is a NATO member, Vučić's policy is designed to subdue its sovereignty and subordinate its foreign policy. The core of the threat is Belgrade's non-acceptance of Montenegro's distinct national identity and separate statehood. Vučić is scheming for a Serbia-Montenegro union, presumably modelled on Putin's drive for a Russia-Belarus union, with Montenegro as the junior partner. In such an arrangement, Belgrade would determine Montenegro's foreign and security policy, weaken Montenegrin identity, and sideline the Albanian and Bosniak minorities. The law on religious property, designed to strengthen the role of the autocephalous Montenegrin Orthodox Church, has been overturned. Further anti-Montenegrin maneuvers will include the introduction of dual citizenship so that non-resident Serbs can register in the census and vote in elections, and the pursuit of cultural and educational campaigns to turn Montenegrins into Serbs. The strongest political force is the leading coalition is the Democratic Front. It's committed to reversing Montenegro's independence and envisages a step-by-step process of forging tighter links with Serbia and using this tripartite coalition as a camouflage. Montenegro's security sector is being compromised through several problematic appointees, evidently coordinated with Belgrade and Moscow. Serbia and Russia are also targeting Montenegro's strategic assets, including plans to purchase the port of Bar and the country's electrical company. Belgrade engages in duplicitous diplomacy. While claiming aspirations to EU membership and closer relations with NATO, Serbia seeks to balance four major powers: Russia, China, the US, and the EU. It aims to benefit from each diplomatically, economically, and militarily, in imitation of Yugoslavia's strategy of non-alignment after Tito's rupture with Stalin in 1948. This can also disguise and assist the pan-Serbian project if Belgrade gains support from major international actors. Instead of direct confrontation that could provoke Western sanctions, Vučić prefers to operate by stealth and to manipulate the vulnerabilities of neighbors. Instead of a direct assault on the integrity or sovereignty of nearby states, Vučić is flexible in diminishing their independence and encouraging nationalist disputes. And instead of a rapid pursuit of regional dominance, Vučić prefers to be patient, calculating that time is on Serbia's side. The second flashing red light at the Balkan crossroads is Russia's neo-imperialism. Putin's Russia views the Balkans as a strategic asset and pursues at least four goals. First, it seeks to expand Russia's geopolitical reach. Traditionally, the Balkans are a stepping stone to the Adriatic and Mediterranean, a link between Europe and Asia, and an inroad into Central Europe. Moscow's influence over Balkan governments, its role in multinational formats, including the Peace Implementation Council in Bosnia, its military deployments, as in Serbia, and its institutional presence through various arms of the Russian state, provide it with a major stake in the region's evolution. A second and related goal is to fracture Western cohesion and undermine the role of Western institutions. Fomenting conflict not only contributes to unsettling the Balkans, it also divides international responses. One recent example is the territorial exchange gamble between Serbia and Kosovo, supported by Moscow and accepted by some Western officials. Even debates about partition promote rifts in the region and policy disarray between Western governments. Unresolved conflicts and disputed states also enable the Kremlin to claim that despite its expansion, NATO has failed to stabilize the Balkans. A third Russian objective is to undercut the US presence. The main reason for obstructing NATO enlargement is to prevent a growing American military footprint and to preclude any firm security guarantees to countries in the region. The Kremlin prefers that Balkan states not join the alliance, as this enhances Washington's role in defending Europe. Nonetheless, it is also intensifying efforts to weaken EU and NATO from within, as its growing influences in Croatia, Hungary, and Bulgaria demonstrate. Joining NATO helps strengthen state security, but it does not ensure immunity from subversion. A fourth Kremlin goal is to gain allies or supplicants. This is where the economic and energy dimensions are most pronounced in corrupting, blackmailing, bribing, or subordinating officials and politicians who can assist Moscow, whether by weakening sanctions, not condemning Russia's actions in international fora, or urging a return to normal business. Although Moscow is not a leading economic player in the Balkans, compared to the EU or even China, its investments and expenditures are targeted for maximum political impact, and the propaganda of Russian assistance is pronounced. Simultaneously, state-directed disinformation campaigns claim that Western democracies are a failing system, that the EU will disintegrate, and that close ties with Russia offer a valuable alternative. Moscow views Belgrade as a useful tool to undermine stability in the Western Balkans, to limit Western integration and expand Russian influence. At some point, however, the Kremlin may try to push Vučić into a direct regional conflict that he has been seeking to avoid. Putin may exploit his even closer alliance with Banja Luka to push for the secession of the Republika Srpska and precipitate a chain reaction of conflict that will preoccupy both the EU and NATO. Moscow promotes local nationalism to stir conflict between rival national projects and to enable the Kremlin to intervene diplomatically. It supports unresolved conflicts and disputed states in the region. It helps the autonomous government in Bosnia's Serb entity to keep the country divided and encourages Bosnian Croats to push for a third entity. In Kosovo, which Russia blocks from UN membership, the Serbian minority is courted as a repressed nationality in order to fan internal conflict. North Macedonia's domestic turmoil and its obstructed path towards the EU has also been exploited by Moscow. Montenegro presents another opportunity for destabilization, as witnessed in the coup attempt directed by Russia's military intelligence in October 2016, and continuing support for Serb nationalists and the Serbian Orthodox Church, who oppose Montenegro's independence. Fourth, Russian state organs engage in disinformation offensives through local media, internet, and social networks to enhance Russia's prestige and undermine Western institutions. Its messages are intended to appeal to anti-globalist, Eurosceptic, ultra-conservative, and religious constituencies in which Russia masquerades as the defender of traditional values, and the EU and US are portrayed as immoral and deviant. It also continues to pose to radical leftists as an anti-imperialist and anti-American vanguard. These themes have resonance throughout Europe, but especially in regions with deep uncertainties about the future. Another flashing red light is China's growing influence in the region, based primarily on investment, trade, and development assistance. China's expanding global role is not dependent on military power, but on economic penetration. Its global ambitions are encapsulated in its Belt and Road Initiative, involving more than 20 countries, and aimed at developing land and sea corridors linking China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Beijing has steadily increased its investment in many countries and seeks to set global regulatory standards that will give advantage to Chinese enterprises and undermine the principles of free trade. Beijing has selected investment targets that are viewed as politically profitable inroads into the EU and has bought or invested in assets amounting to over $300 billion over the past decade. State-owned Chinese companies have purchased cargo terminals in the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Rim and control about a tenth of European port capacity. China is also financing the building of roads and railways throughout Southeast Europe. This forms part of Beijing's plans to link China with Europe by sea, road, rail, and pipeline, and it also means political influence. In exchange for economic investments, Beijing seeks diplomatic support for its policies or to neutralize criticisms in international institutions. Beijing aims to divide Europe from the US and to prevent the emergence of an anti-China front. Beijing's offers to boost local economies are difficult to resist, particularly by relatively poor countries along the BRI route in search of capital. China's geoeconomic strategy offers substantial financing, but without the regulatory and legal standards on which Western institutions insist. Western states need to implement policies that can contain Chinese influence, but without damaging the economic development of countries along the route. They must boost Western competitiveness in foreign markets while ensuring that Chinese investments adhere to international standards and not push governments into becoming permanent debtors. A few words about the amber or yellow light at the Balkan crossroads, which is encapsulated in the EU approach. The European Union confronts a major dilemma. On the one hand, blocking the accession path for West Balkan states could unleash the very problems that Brussels seeks to avoid by damaging EU credibility, disillusioning citizens, undermining domestic reform programs, and providing more openings to hostile foreign interference. Conversely, if accession is opened primarily because of fears of radicalism, then the reform program itself may lose value. The imminent threat of instability then becomes the most powerful reason for starting the process of EU accession. Lack of any realistic prospects for EU membership also contribute to public resentment. The Union's reputation has taken a severe blow and will further deteriorate if it fails to start membership talks with Albania and North Macedonia. The process has been postponed mainly because Bulgaria has been playing the nationalist card by insisting that its dispute with Skopje over history and language must be resolved before the talks can begin. Numerous other EU failures have deepened the malaise. Brussels has proved painfully slow in providing coronavirus vaccines to the Balkans, convincing some to turn to China and Russia. The denial of visa liberalization for Kosovo makes Albanians the only ethnic outcasts on the continent. Inadequate EU economic investments in the poorer Balkan states contributes to outmigration and helps fuel poverty and radicalism. For Albanians, the inconclusiveness of the Pristina-Belgrade talks, the non-recognition of Kosovo's statehood by 5 EU members, and Kosovo's inability to enter major international institutions such as the UN drives perceptions that pan-Serbianism is somehow condoned in EU capitals. Pan-Albanian aspirations will be driven by the lack of realistic prospects for EU accession for Albania and Kosovo, and for countries with sizable Albanian communities such as North Macedonia and Montenegro. Resentment of EU policy is compounded by what is widely viewed as Western tolerance of the Greater Serbia project and an unwillingness to strongly confront Russia's interference throughout the region. Ambitious politicians can exploit numerous grievances while promising national unification across existing borders. There is widespread anger with corrupt politicians and institutions that contribute to economic stagnation, rising unemployment, and the emigration of young and educated people. Elections change little, as the state is dominated by interest groups who use their period in office to enrich themselves and remain in power. In these challenging conditions, the idea of national unification in one state structure can hold a promise of progress and historical justice. But moves towards state enlargement would inevitably spark conflicts with neighbors and spur demands for border changes among other ethnic groups. Although political leaders repeat the formula that nationalist aspirations will be neutralized through pan-European unification, they must also be calculating how to benefit from nationalist sentiments if the path to the EU is indefinitely blocked. Lastly and briefly, where are the flashing green lights at the Balkan crossroads? They are not flashing and are barely visible since the success of NATO inclusion for Montenegro and North Macedonia and the signing of the Prespa Accords between Skopje and Athens. Negotiations between Serbia and Kosovo, which we started in Brussels in June, under the auspices of the EU, hold the key for stability in the Western Balkans. Without an agreement on mutual recognition as independent states, the festering dispute will unsettle borders, curtail economic development, and preclude EU integration. For the talks to succeed, the Biden administration needs to play a more active role in the process. Whereas the EU is viewed in the region as divided and unreliable, the US retains credibility because of its leadership role in resolving previous Balkan conflicts. The Biden administration has confirmed that mutual interstate recognition between Serbia and Kosovo is the only viable solution. The acceptance of final borders would allow for economic development in both states and inhibit the Kremlin's corrupt regional inroads. Without a bilateral agreement, the region could again descend into conflict, propelled by Serbian and Albanian nationalist ambitions. The US must also take the lead in reforming Bosnian institutions and modernizing its constitution, as only an integrated state can move towards EU and NATO membership and preserve stability and pursue economic development. And the US must remain committed to Montenegro's independence and Western integration. Some NATO allies are worried that the current government in Podgorica wants to turn the country into a mini Serbia and with closer relations with Moscow. If Montenegro is to be a reliable ally, it must make sure that the military establishment is not penetrated by Russian intelligence, that sensitive NATO information is not shared with Serbian or Russian operatives, and that Montenegrin politicians and parties are not corrupted by Russian money, which always has geopolitical strings attached. The more that Montenegro's identity and sovereignty are undermined, the more vulnerable the country will become to outside pressure. The Montenegrin majority committed to independence needs to become more vocal and active, whether in the media, social networks, civil organizations, and in the political realm, inside and outside parliament. Many patriotic Montenegrins voted for the coalition, believing it would root out corruption and deliver faster European Union entry. But their disillusionment should not turn either to violence or to apathy, but towards supporting those politicians and those parties that are committed to Montenegro, its past, its present, and its future. Again, thank you for inviting me. Best wishes for the conference.